this by far, right now, is my favorite part. And this is where we get to recognize and honor someone who truly has been a champion in aging issues impacting particularly the most vulnerable older adults, not only in Los Angeles, but across the nation. And this award that the LA Aging Advocacy Coalition, LAAC, initiated last year recognizes an individual for their lifetime of work and for not only the process, but the impact that their work has had in improving the lives of older adults. And it's also in recognition of their contributions to LAAC and helping us achieve our goals and objectives and making Los Angeles and beyond a better world for those vulnerable older adults. And it's with great honor that we recognize today someone who I've seen as a friend, as a colleague, as a mentor, and as a fighter joined at the hip in making a difference, and that's Marvin Schachter. If you knew Marvin, and I think many or most of us in this room knew Marvin, he always had a fire burning under you, and it sort of said, "You got to do this, you got to do that," and he was so inspirational and motivated us to do the right thing, to pay attention to the things that really mattered. And I'll never forget, as we're sitting around planning and strategizing and identifying our priorities as part of the coalition, he would always, he would agree with the many things that we would say, but he would not let us forget housing. Remember, housing, access to affordable, quality housing is important. He was, as always, ahead of his time because it was an issue then, but it's even a greater issue today. Many cities are seeing major change. Los Angeles is no exception. Change is good, but carefully done to the point where you're not displacing people. And that's what we're seeing today. And Marvin, made it clear to us that was a significant issue, not the only issue, but a major issue as we look at the landscape of issues that we have to address. And I'm glad Marvin pointed that out to us early and often, because we're now in that battle. There's in change and in gentrification, older adults, many of us whom we serve day to day, are being displaced. And where they go, I have no idea. That really concerns me. So that certainly is an issue that we need to address as a coalition. And Marv was there to remind us of that. And in his legacy, we won't forget that. And we'll fight on because of him. Before we do the actual presentation of the award, I do want to recognize, and I am really touched and I appreciate that Marv's family, although Marv, as you know, is no longer with us, his spirit lives in all of us, in particular in his family, who his wife Esther and his daughters Pam and Amanda are here to accept the award on his behalf. So we'll be hearing from them, but please, let's give them a round of applause and welcome them. I do want to acknowledge that this year's LAAC Champion Award Luncheon is being sponsored by AARP California, Real Possibilities. I want to thank AARP for making this possible. And Marv was, as he was engaged with LAAC, he was also very connected to AARP and was a staunch member of AARP. Of course, one time I remember, I used to work for AARP, for some of you may not know that, And during the time of Part D debate in policy, and Ernie and I remember this, Marv got so upset with what was going on, he went in front of the ARP building and actually literally ripped his ARP membership card in protest, But, but Marv, he was someone that didn't let incidents or one occurrence change things. And so he certainly went back and embraced the ARP family, and certainly ARP and all of us were the better for that. And so we're going to have Sam Thomas come up in a few minutes to say a few words on behalf of AARP, and also on a personal note, because Sam, you worked with him very closely. But before that, I also want to give the opportunity to another organization where Marv really put his stamp and engaged fully, and that's the California Commission on Aging. And Ed Walsh, Commissioner, is here, and he'd like to say a few words on behalf of the California Commission. And as Marv used to say, nothing about us without us. Go Marv. Ed?
And I must say before I start my comments, I'm so glad that Rigo's younger than I am, because he's going to make sure that we have the services we need when we're frail and we need them. Right? Unfortunately, our executive director, Sandy Fitzpatrick, couldn't be with us today. She has business in Sacramento. So I will share her comments with you all and then add a few of my own. And I do want to recognize Commissioner Carmen Reyes, who is here with us today, and a very strong advocate and a shining member of the Commission. Glad to be working with Carmen. Sandy tells us all that Marvin was appointed to the Commission by Governor Davis in the year 2000 and served until October 2006. So he served, we have 2 3-year terms, so he served his full term and would have served longer probably if he could have. He was a capable member of the Executive Committee, the Legislative Committee, and a delegate to the 2005 White House Conference on Aging. His real passion was in advocating for senior housing, as Rigo mentioned. He sat near the front and was always quick with a question and stood up for the rights of older adults at the White House Conference. While we know how much he was valued by the Los Angeles community, he was equally valued by his exemplary statewide advocacy. His ability to take an idea from concept to implementation and move the whole room with him was exceptional, and we will miss Marvin. That's from Sandy. And having been a resident of Pasadena and working at Huntington Hospital in Pasadena, I knew Marvin at a local level as well. And I think, as we've said before, and people will say this today as well, Marvin had an impact at every level, at the local level, at the state level, that you heard from Sandy, and at the federal level. Wherever he wasn't sitting still. He was not the new smoking. He was never sitting. He was moving. And he was moving the agenda forward every day of his life. So we all appreciate Marvin's presence, and he will be with us in spirit. And when we get tired or discouraged, we'll remember Marvin, and we'll remember that passion to move us forward. Thanks for Marvin.
Thank you, Rigo. I do want to again thank the Schachter family for joining us today and allowing us to honor Marvin. Esther, of course, he was married to Marvin 60 years. You want to just wave a little bit so they can see who you are? Okay. All right. And thank you. And also Pam, who works at UCLA in the field of education. She's joining us today, and I think later is going to join us for a few words. And then, of course, Amanda, who I think you live in Santa Monica and you work in Santa Monica. She's a senior planner in the city of Santa Monica. Thank you for coming. It's really an honor that you could be with us You know, Marvin received the ARP highest award in 2011, and it's called the Andrews Award, and it's in memory of our founder, a lady called Dr. Ethel Percy Andrews, and she was a principal at a high school just up the street from here for 28 years called Abraham Lincoln High School. Wonderful woman, just a great leader for our organization. So he did receive that award in 2011 for all his great volunteer work for us. And he not only worked in Los Angeles for ARP, but he also worked up in the Sacramento area at the state level on the executive council of ARP. So he was quite involved in a lot of things. He even lectured at the University of Southern California on senior issues. So he was a lecturer for ARP. And then I think you've heard that he served on the Los Angeles County for Aging here in the Los Angeles area, and of course the California Commission on Aging, the White House Conference on Aging. And he worked with me in Pasadena for a number of years, almost 10 years, on a conference that we put on healthy aging. We had workshops and everything. So he was quite active. He was also president of the American Civil Liberties Union of the Southern California area. So he did a lot. And on ARP issues, we've all heard about Social Security, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, housing, Older Americans Act. Those are the issues that he would help us with. And we would go to different legislators' offices, and he could take a complicated bill or an issue and make it so simple and human and so motivating to that person, so that he had that great ability to speak. Marvin also, his daughter tells me, Pam, that when they were little and in school, occasionally he would go to school and even talk about famous historical figures. And he could be so clear and good, or on political issues. So he was, he was a real, he was also an avid reader. I understand from Esther that most every day he read the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times and the Pasadena Star News. And even at one time, he became part owner of the Pasadena Weekly, and that's a local paper. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and during the Great Depression, and I think that really influenced his life. And it made a difference. When he was very young, I'm not sure what age, but he had the honor of meeting Mrs. Roosevelt in the White House. So that was quite a thing, I think. And he seems to have never, he told me about it, and I thought that was so good. And then during the Second World War, unfortunately, members of Marvin's family that couldn't immigrate to the United States died in the Holocaust. So he really suffered some personal tragedies. In 1943, during the Second World War, he served with the United States Intelligence Service. He studied Russian and German, those languages. He went to the University of Chicago, I believe. He also, he needed a job during college when he was out in Colorado, so he found a job with one of his professors, and the professor needed someone to come to the home and prepare meals in the evening. So Marvin said, I found a cookbook, and I taught myself to cook. And they even liked it. And occasionally we'd be driving together, and he'd tell me about how to fix different soups, because he loved good soups, like on a cold day like today. And during the summer one time, he even told me how to fix gazpacho soup. So that was great. Also, according to Esther and Pam, on Sundays, he would even prepare the Sunday brunch, or whatever you want to call it, breakfast. And he did a wonderful job. He loved omelets. He'd prepare the omelets, or Esther said he would even make delicious platters of food with all kinds of vegetables on it. So he loved food, and he was a good cook, I think. And for exercise, I don't think he belonged to a gym, but he would work in his garden for 2 hours at least. Anytime he had a chance, he'd work in his gardens. And occasionally he and Esther would take his dog Nikki down to it's called the Arroyo, and they would take their dog Nikki for walks in the Arroyo. And one thing she did share with me is that his favorite dog one of his favorite dogs was an English bulldog called Curtis. And Curtis was one of his favorite dogs, so he's very close to Curtis. In Pasadena, you know, he worked on the desegregation of the Unified School District of Pasadena. And in the 1960s, he met John F. Kennedy because he was covering the Presidential Democratic Convention for KPFK. And Marvin had a weekly biweekly KPFK radio program. So he was always active in so many ways. Esther tells me that in spite of his busy career in business and as a volunteer, he always was a good husband, a good father, and he always put his family first. So he was a real good human being that I really loved and liked. So I want to thank the family for allowing us to honor Marvin. And Rigo, I think you're going to bring the award up and thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I don't think there's more that we could say. I think you've heard that this award on behalf of the coalition is extremely well deserved. And without any further ado, I would like to honor Marv, congratulate Marv on being LAAC's 2015 Champion Awardee. And on his behalf, if I could ask Pam to come up and say a few words and accept on behalf of Marvin.
I wrote some words because I knew if I tried to speak extemporaneously, as my father always would, I would probably start crying. And I'm going to start crying anyway. Because in my family, I'm known as the ultimate Schachter heart, which means, you know, just a heart of tenderness and rags. But that's because of how my parents raised us. My father, you know, all the things that everybody has said about my father are just remarkably true. And in these last 3 months since he died, we've been just overwhelmed and thrilled by all the kind things that people have said. And it's been wonderful to know, of course, that we know how true they are and that he made such a difference in people's lives, and he would definitely want to be remembered this way. And it was one of the things that my father always said to me was that when we would say, you know, maybe you should slow down and spend more time in the garden, or, you know, hang out with, well, my dog. I have a bulldog because Pop had a bulldog, and so I was the keeper of the bulldog flame. But, you know, just spend more time with the grandkids, even though he spent lots of time with the grandkids, and, you know, hang out with my mother more. He said, well, he really wanted to keep out there advocating as long as he can contribute, as long as he could make a contribution. And I can see from all the folks in the room and the activities that you do that everyone feels that he did really almost until the very end, those last 2 weeks when he got ill, that he made a contribution and continued to make that contribution to advocate for what he thought was important and valuable and to really make a difference in the lives of the Los Angeles community and the state of California. And when we went to his calendar that he kept on paper, not the computer, but on paper, in his with all his numbers and, you know, all the things that he'd collected, his calendar was full with events that had already been scheduled that he was planning to do. So I know till the very end he was active and engaged, and that's really what he wanted. You know, we thought he was such a vibrant force that he would go on forever, and I think based on what everyone's saying, at least the things that he cared about and the work that you all are doing, ensures that he really will go on forever. And so my mother, my sister, and I thank you very much for this, and I guess that's it. Thank you.